Hello everybody, this is Vidit Kumar, and today's video we are going to be discussing about the Ramanujan's last letter and his lost notebook. Now, how was his notebook found, and how did we came to know that there was a notebook of Ramanujan which he left and which was never published by him? Sir George Andrews, or simply Professor Andrews, found that book. And how exactly was it found? This thing we are going to be discussing in this video. And it actually had a deep imprint in the society. Ramanujan contributed a lot to the mathematical society. Because of that, he was made a fellow of the Royal Society, and he was helped and mentored by G.H. Hardy. Professor G.H. Hardy was also a great mathematician who helped Ramanujan in his work and who motivated him. Ramanujan traveled to England to show his research and publish his paper. Ramanujan died of tuberculosis in India. Just after a year he came to India, he died of tuberculosis. So the magical mathematician Srinivas Ramanujan died over 100 years, and tomorrow, that is on 26th of December, was his death anniversary. In 1920, Vigyan Parasar organized events under the name of Ramanujan, which was called the Ramanujan Yatra, and this thing comprised of a series of talk which was held on the Ramanujan's work. T.T. Venkateswaran of Vigyan Parasar says that Ramanujan's life carries the message that perseverance leads to result, and that one should not give up in the face of adversities and challenges. Professor George E. Andrew in 1976 found Ramanujan's notes in England, which was written during his last years in England. So when he spent his last few years in England, then he wrote some note which was found by George E. Andrew, and it was found by chance. We would have never known that Ramanujan had written something, but Andrew found that. Now 40% of what he found was chaotic, which was not understandable, and the rest 60% he could understand. Many of them were not related, and his page was full of equation after equation. There was no beginning, no explanation of the equation. Ramanujan himself used to say that the equation comes to him on his tongue, and actually he didn't used to give the proofs, he used to give the equations. That was the specialty about him, and he believed in God. Now, continuing to what the topic of the video is, in the last letter of the Ramanujan, G.H. Hardy, dated January 20, 1920, had written that he discovered very interesting functions recently, which he had called mock theta functions. Now, this was not like the false theta functions, which was studied partially by Professor Rogers in his interesting paper. Now, he said that this thing enters mathematics beautifully as the ordinary theta functions. Now, he gave some examples and relationships also. In the last page of the letter which he wrote, he writes three functions, calling them order third, order fifth, and order seventh, and he ends with a cryptic statement. He says that these functions are not related to. He said that these functions are not related to one another. Ramanujan died on April 26, 1920. As Professor Andrews observed, the note that Ramanujan made might would have been handed to G.N. Watson by G.H. Hardy, who was his mentor. So that's what Professor Andrews observed, and he probably would have given him for the work of editing and compiling. That's what Professor Andrews observed. So this nice looking young man died at the age of 32 in 1920. In 1965, Professor Watson also died, and in 1976, Professor Andrews visited his family, and then he saw the letters that the farmer had left behind. The letters actually, or the books or his collection, covered the floor of a good sized room, and the depth was to the feet. That's what she said. So that's how many letters he had when he lived. So he wrote them, or he collected them. So those letters were basically left there to be burned in a few days. So those letters were supposed to be burned, but Professor Andrew luckily found some mathematical document, and he also found some receipts, a token, etc. Professor Andrew found that pile of the work of Professor Watson consisted of some mathematical documents. It consisted of receipts and token as well. Professor Watson was a very enthusiastic collector. He used to collect these letters from everywhere, or he used to also write them. So that's what was the specialty of Professor Watson. Now, Professor Andrew took one of the letters from random, and he came up with a set of notes. Now, the equation that were written there was not having any start or any end. So they were basically vague equations without a start or end. It was not explicitly stated, or he had some trouble in understanding those equations. Now, just so those equations were just numbers, and there was some equations written. Now, luckily, Professor Andrew studied the mock theta function earlier, and he was able to recognize. Professor Andrew gave a lecture in the Ramanujan Yatra, and about which we had discussed earlier. So, and in that yatra, he described how he lost his note and how he found the gems embedded in it. So that's what I'm trying to dictate to you. Now, he was able to recognize by the notebook, by those papers, that this work was of Ramanujan's only, because of his last letter. So, because of his last work and his last letter, he was able to recognize that the book would have been written by Ramanujan's only. So that's how he found that book was written by Ramanujan. The page was full of equation after equation. So that's all about Ramanujan and his lost book. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for watching this video.